Hello, Scorpio. If you found yourself here, it's not by accident. There's something in your energy restless, searching, half weary but still hopeful, that's reaching for clarity right now. And I want to speak directly to that part of you. The part that's been holding everything in. Too afraid to let go. Too exhausted to keep holding on. Because what you're sitting in lately, it's not just confusion. It's something deeper. A feeling like you're trapped in a loop you can't break. Questioning not only the relationship you're in, but also the version of yourself that's been showing up for it. And that kind of internal tug of war isn't something you talk about out loud. But it's been loud inside your mind. You've been in a place where the idea of change doesn't feel liberating. It feels dangerous. You're aware that something is shifting, that the dynamic you're in isn't sustainable in its current form. But there's hesitation. And it's not because you're naive or blind to the red flags. You see them. You've cataloged them. You've probably journaled about them at 2 a.m. trying to make sense of what part of this connection still feels worth salvaging. But every time you think about walking away, a voice inside whispers, "What if you're just overreacting?" And every time you try to stay, to give more, to explain one more time, something in your body tightens, like your own intuition is resisting your loyalty to someone who can't meet you halfway. This isn't about some dramatic betrayal. It's about subtle erosion. The way your boundaries keep bending until you don't even recognize what your no used to sound like. The way you've learned to rehearse your feelings before you speak them, just to make sure they won't be twisted or dismissed. The way you've started to silence your instincts because you don't want to seem too sensitive, too emotional, too much. And all the while, if you're asking yourself, is this love? Or is this just fear of starting over? You're not broken for feeling uncertain. You're not weak for wanting to be seen without having to perform your worth. You're just tired of holding space for someone else's emotional distance. Tired of adjusting your tone so they don't shut down. Tired of trying to make a relationship feel safe when it never truly has been. And somewhere in all of this, Scorpio, you've lost track of your own center. The part of you that knows your truth without needing it validated. The part that remembers how it feels to be emotionally held, not just tolerated. So here you are, caught in a moment that's asking for brutal honesty. Not with them yet, but with yourself. Are you staying because you believe this can grow? Or are you staying because you've convinced yourself that this is as close to love as you're going to get right now? Because if it's the second one, then the real work ahead of you isn't about fixing the relationship. It's about coming back to yourself. The version of you that doesn't settle for connection built on control, convenience, or emotional conditioning. I know it's hard. You love deeply. You forgive quickly. You want to believe that your presence alone can heal the dynamic. But Scorpio, this time, isn't about fixing what's breaking. It's about refusing to break yourself just to keep the illusion going. Take your time. Feel it all. But don't ignore the part of you that's already halfway out the door, not because you're giving up, but because you're finally ready to choose peace over potential. And then there's them. The person you've been orbiting, sometimes close enough to feel the warmth of what could be. And other times, so far away, it feels like you're shouting into a void. This isn't someone who wears their heart on their sleeve. No. They calculate. They observe. They don't fall, they measure. And from the very beginning. You've felt it the way they study you. Not with curiosity, but with quiet skepticism. As if they're constantly asking, "Are you enough for me? Do you check all the boxes I haven't even told you exist?" It's not that they're cruel. It's that they're precise, guarded, sharp in their silence, even sharper in their expectations. They keep their feelings behind lock and key, and you're left guessing what your role really is. They give just enough to keep you hoping, enough glimmers of connection to keep you leaning in. But every time you think you're getting closer, something shifts: cold detachment, a critical tone, a sudden retreat. They don't say it out loud, but the message is clear: don't get too comfortable. You haven't earned permanence yet. And so, you stay in limbo, pouring your heart into a space where the rules are unwritten. The bar keeps moving, and your worth feels like it's being weighed on a scale you'll never fully understand. What's most disorienting is that this person likely doesn't even see themselves as unkind. In their mind, they're being honest, rational, maybe even protective of themselves, of the future they've built up in their imagination. But in practice, it means you're constantly performing. You try to show them your depth, your loyalty, your value, but it never feels like quite enough. Their standards are so tightly held that you start wondering if this is a test you were meant to fail from the beginning. And when they do soften, when they let the walls down just an inch, it feels so rare and fleeting that you cling to it, hoping that this time, maybe this time, they'll finally see you. But Scorpio, let's be honest, someone who truly sees you doesn't keep you on a leash of almost. They don't ration connection like a reward for good behavior. They don't keep one eye on you and the other on a future fantasy version of their ideal partner. You are not a placeholder. You are not an audition. And no matter how emotionally intelligent or spiritually evolved you are, being constantly scrutinized by someone who hasn't decided if they'll choose you, that takes a toll. It makes you shrink. It makes you question your voice. And slowly, it chips away at the very part of you that knows you were never meant to beg for love. You're not here to convince someone of your worth, especially not someone who only knows how to love through control, detachment, or intellectual superiority. You can meet them with compassion. You can acknowledge that they've been hurt before, that maybe their standards are a shield. But you cannot keep standing in front of that shield, hoping they'll eventually lower it long enough to let you through. Because love isn't about earning your way into someone's guarded heart. It's about being met where you are with openness, not with evaluation. And deep down, Scorpio, you already know that. And what makes it harder to breathe in this connection, Scorpio, is that it's not loud abuse. It's not betrayal in the way you've come to recognize from past scars. No one's yelling. No one's walking out and slamming doors. It's more subtle than that: quiet, polished, almost invisible to anyone on the outside. But to you, it feels like walking on a floor made of glass. Every step is calculated. Every word is measured, because beneath the surface of this connection is a current of control so refined, so expertly veiled in logic and good intentions, that even you, with all your depth, all your insight, have started to question whether the weight you feel is real, or just your own sensitivity acting up. This person doesn't demand obedience. They don't bark orders. Instead, they suggest how you could be better. They observe when you're emotional and respond with a cool detachment that makes your vulnerability feel like a problem, not a bridge. They correct instead of connect. They pull back instead of lean in. And each time they do, you're left wondering if you just said too much, or felt too deeply, or showed your hand too soon. That's the trap. You begin to self-edit. You start rehearsing before you speak. You catch yourself reaching for their approval without even realizing it, until one day, you look in the mirror and don't recognize the version of you that has learned to dim your fire just to keep the room from getting too warm for them. This isn't about love anymore. This is about emotional conditioning, about being slowly trained to believe that the only way to maintain peace is to never be too much, never too loud, never too messy, never too human. And the hardest part, Scorpio, is that you keep thinking if you could just explain it better, if you could just be a little more composed, a little less reactive, then maybe, just maybe, they would finally see your intentions clearly. But every time you do, what you get in return is not clarity. It's judgment, or silence, or that calm, clinical tone that says, I hear you, but you're wrong. This kind of manipulation doesn't scream. It whispers. It drips into your mind like water against stone, carving new fears, new doubts, until suddenly you find yourself defending your right to feel. You're not even asking for affection anymore. You're asking to not be misunderstood. And that is not love. That's survival. That's standing in a space where the emotional temperature is always just a little too cold, and being expected to stay grateful just because it's not freezing. And you? Scorpio, you weren't born to survive someone else's emotional climate. You were born to transform, to feel, to burn, to rise from what tries to contain you. But in this space, all that power is being slowly drained. Not stolen, not shattered, just siphoned. Through small moments that leave you wondering whether you're asking too much. When all you've ever wanted is to be seen as you are. You don't have to perform to be loved. You don't have to prove your worth to someone who keeps moving the finish line. And you sure as hell don't have to stay somewhere that teaches you to mistrust your own emotional compass, if that's what this connection has become. Scorpio, then the most radical thing you can do now is choose to stop proving and start protecting. Not just your heart, your whole becoming. And this is where the inner conflict really begins to bleed through. Scorpio, you keep telling yourself that love requires work, that no one is perfect, that maybe this is just part of learning how to love someone who protects themselves differently than you do. So you try harder. You adjust. You breathe through your reactions. You take notes on their moods, on what triggers them, on how to present your feelings so they don't feel too intense. You become a student of the relationship, believing that if you can just learn the right formula, if you can just pass the test, they'll finally relax, finally soften, finally let you in. But no matter how much effort you put in, there's always this quiet undercurrent. You're still not quite there. That's the wound that keeps opening. It's not rejection, it's the almost. The good effort energy, the way they'll nod when you open up, maybe even thank you for being vulnerable. But then immediately follow it with analysis. Kritik. Comparison. The moment you share something raw, they switch into teacher mode, dissecting your emotion like it's a case study. And suddenly, instead of feeling seen, you feel exposed. Instead of feeling closer, you feel corrected. Their feedback, no matter how calmly delivered, never lands like support. It lands like a red pen across your heart, and you start bracing for it. Even when you're hurting, even when you're longing for comfort, you hesitate because you already know how this goes. So you begin to hide the softer parts of yourself. You took your fears under your tongue. You rehearse every sentence before you say it. You wait for the right moment. And when it never comes, you swallow the words completely, not because you don't want to be known, but because every attempt at being real has started to feel like stepping into a spotlight you never asked for. And you're tired. Scorpio. Tired of auditioning for love. Tired of wondering whether your truth is palatable enough for someone who sees your emotions as puzzles to be solved rather than experiences to be held. There's this quiet grief inside of you, not just for the version of this connection you hoped for, but for the parts of yourself you've started to mute just to keep the peace. You know you have wisdom. You know you have depth. You know you're capable of loving someone through all their shadows. But you're starting to realize you're the only one doing that. You're showing up fully, messy and honest, while they stay behind the glass safe, composed, clinical, and the longer that goes on, the more it breaks you in places you've spent years healing. This isn't intimacy. This is performance. A dynamic where you are constantly the one adapting, adjusting, and making space while they remain unchanged. untouched, unquestioned. And it's not that you expect perfection, but what you long for is a partner, not a professor grading your emotional growth, like an essay on what love should look like. And Scorpio, that ache you're feeling, that tug in your chest every time you start to speak and then decide it's safer not to. That is your truth trying to surface. That is your inner self, begging for a relationship where you don't have to be anything but real, where your emotions aren't a lesson to be evaluated, but a bridge to be crossed together. Until then, your silence isn't weakness. It's self-protection. But it can't be your forever. You deserve more than applause for effort. You deserve to be met, felt, and finally understood. And maybe this is the hardest truth to hold. Scorpio, the one you've been circling, sensing, but haven't yet spoken out loud. This isn't a relationship that's helping you grow. Not in the way growth is meant to feel shared, supported, reciprocal. What's happening here is a slow erosion, masked as maturity. It's a cycle that looks, on the outside, like two people working through things. But when you step back, you see the pattern. You try. You reach out. You open. They judge. Correct. Withdraw. And then you retreat, not because you've stopped loving, but because you've learned it's safer to pull back than to be repeatedly misunderstood. Again and again. You give it one more chance, only to find yourself emotionally limping back into solitude, telling yourself to be quieter next time, to be less vulnerable, to say it better, or not at all. But Scorpio, what if the problem isn't your delivery? What if the problem is that you're speaking to someone who doesn't know how to hold space for the version of you that isn't perfectly polished or emotionally curated? You're not failing because you're too much. You're exhausted because you've been trying to translate your truth into a language that was never meant to be foreign. And the real tragedy is that you've started believing the problem lies in you. That if you were just more stable, more rational, more evolved, then maybe the relationship would flow. But this isn't growth. This is contortion. This is you folding yourself into shapes that keep shrinking your essence just to avoid the discomfort of being misunderstood. And that's not love, that's survival. Inside a dynamic that keeps requiring you to perform stability while you're quietly bleeding out. And it has to stop. You don't need to be anyone else to be worthy of love. You don't need to keep contorting into what someone else believes is the better version of you. That narrative where you must fix yourself, shrink yourself, prove yourself is not yours to carry anymore. It's okay to step back. Not as an act of punishment, not to manipulate, but to protect the parts of you that are still learning how to be soft again after being hardened by disappointment. Pulling away doesn't mean you stopped loving. It means you finally started choosing yourself within the love. It means you've realized that being loved for who you are is more important than being accepted for who you pretend to be. And maybe they'll never understand that. Maybe they'll say you gave up too soon or that you couldn't handle the truth. But that's not your responsibility anymore. Your responsibility now is to the self you're becoming. The self who no longer trades peace for proximity. The self who is healing in silence. Not because you're afraid, but because you're done explaining your pain to someone who only listens when it's convenient. So rest, Scorpio. Reclaim your breath. And when you're ready, rise again, unapologetic, unperformed, and whole. This, Scorpio, is your awakening, a quiet but powerful reminder that love should never require you to perform. That if you find yourself constantly editing your emotions, walking on eggshells, or asking for permission to simply exist as you are, then what you're in is not love. It's conditioning. It's a performance wrapped in obligation, not a sacred space of mutual respect. You've spent enough time shape-shifting, enough time calculating your tone, holding your breath, managing someone else's comfort at the expense of your truth. That isn't connection. That's emotional labor masked as intimacy, and you're allowed to be done with that. Stepping back doesn't mean you failed. Slowing down doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you're choosing to see clearly. To stop chasing validation from someone who only applauds the version of you that fits neatly into their expectations. You are not too much. You are not hard to love. You are simply done abandoning yourself in the name of closeness. So take the space, breathe deeply, and remember, choosing your peace over performance isn't retreat. It's reclamation. So, if you've made it this far, Scorpio, maybe your soul already knew something had to shift. This connection, this push-pull, this cycle of trying to be understood while constantly being reshaped, it's been draining you. And the truth is, you don't need another lecture. You don't need someone to fix you. You need space to remember who you are when you're not being watched, judged, or tested. So here's your permission to step back without guilt, to protect your healing without apology, to stop explaining your worth to someone who never truly saw it in the first place. The next chapter won't require you to shrink. It won't ask you to audition. It will meet you fully, honestly, and without a script. And until that arrives, keep loving yourself enough to walk away from anything that makes you question your right to be whole. You're not losing them. You're finding you. I'll see you in the next message. Scorpio, until then, honor your silence, trust your intuition, and come home to yourself.